Muy buenos días
Good morning,
a todas y
everybody.
todos. Soy Paulina
I am
Salazar,
Paulina
coordinadora
Salazar.
de
I am a
alianza en
press
el Laboratorio de
coordinator from the
Investigación e
Laboratory of Research and
Innovación en
Innovation in
Educación para América
Education
Latina y
for
el
Latin
Caribe,
America and the
SUMA, y
Caribbean,
encargada de las
SUMA, and
comunicaciones
in
del
charge of
Observatorio ADAPTE.
communications for the
Bienvenidas y
Adapted
bienvenidos al
Observatory.
webinar
Welcome to
Resiliencia
the webinar.
Educativa, Significados y Prácticas en América Latina y el Caribe, organizado por el Observatorio de la Resiliencia Educativa en América Latina y el Caribe. Adapted es un proyecto que busca producir y construir conocimiento para apoyar a los países de la región a generar diálogos en sus sistemas educativos que les permitan mejorar la capacidad de adaptación para enfrentar escenarios de emergencia. Trabajamos con los países socios de la Alianza Mundial para la Educación GPI, Belice, Dominica, El Salvador, Granada, Guatemala, Guyana, Haití, Honduras, Nicaragua, Santa Lucía y San Vicente y las Granadinas. El proyecto está conformado por el Grupo de Análisis para el Desarrollo Grave, por el Laboratorio de Investigación e Innovación en Educación para América Latina y el Caribe, SUMA, y UNICEF-LACRO, y es apoyado por el intercambio de conocimiento e innovación de la Alianza Mundial para la Educación GPI-KICS en un esfuerzo conjunto con el Centro Internacional de Investigaciones para el Desarrollo IDRC de Canadá. Esta mañana queremos saludar especialmente a Tricia Wynn, líder del programa de intercambio de conocimiento e innovación de la Alianza Mundial para Educación GPI-KICS, a Santiago Cueto, líder del Observatorio para la Resiliencia Educativa en América Latina y el Caribe e investigador principal de GRADE, a Romina Kasman, encargada del sector de educación de la Oficina Regional de la UNESCO en San José para Centroamérica, Colombia y México, y a Dante Castillo, director en Políticas y Prácticas Innovadoras y director de Innovación en SUMA. Asimismo, saludamos cordialmente a todas las y los asistentes que se conectan desde diversos países de América Latina y el Caribe. Saludamos también a todas las y los representantes de instituciones públicas, privadas y de la sociedad civil que hoy nos acompañan. Muchas gracias por unirse a este webinar Resiliencia Educativa, Significados y Prácticas en América Latina y el Caribe. En el Observatorio ADAPTE tenemos 3 objetivos como proyectos. El primero es identificar y analizar los sistemas y prácticas de resiliencia en los sistemas educativos de los países socios del GPI en América Latina y el Caribe. El segundo es explorar escenarios futuros en países de la región miembros del GPI con miras a proponerles recomendaciones para prepararse ante la crisis y contar con herramientas para abordar de manera efectiva. Y
Ready
nuestro
before
tercer objetivo
crises
es movilizar
and
la
to have the
evidencia
tools
generada
to tackle
entre
them
las y los
effectively.
actores
And the third
claves de los
objective is to
sistemas
mobilize
educativos de la
evidence
región,
based
promoviendo su uso
between
y
key
puesta en
actors
práctica
in the
para
educational systems
fortalecer
of
la
Latin America and the
resiliencia
Caribbean,
educativa.
promoting their
En
usage
este
and
marco es que ADAPTE
implementation
produjo
to
su primer
strengthen
reporte de
educational
evidencia
resilience.
que realizó un
We
análisis de los
presented
contenidos
our
de las
first
actuales leyes
report
generales de
that
educación,
shows the
planes
current general
curriculares
laws on
y planes
education, the
estratégicos de
curriculum
educación de los
plans,
11
and
países
strategic
miembros
plans for
del
education
GPI
of the
y
11
que hoy les
members of the
presentaremos.
GPA, and we will
Antes de
present them to you.
continuar, les queremos
Before we
recordar que
continue, we
está
want to
abierta la
remind you
sección
that the
de preguntas y
Q&A section
respuestas.
is open,
Además, está
and we
en el
also
chat de
have
Zoom,
the
donde
chat
pueden compartir de
in the
donde nos
Zoom
están
app where
mirando.
you can
Aquí
share
comenzamos,
from
nos
where
está
you are
hablando
looking
desde
at us.
Chile, Santiago.
And from here, we are
Para
talking from
continuar,
Santiago de
quiero
Chile.
invitar entonces
To
a dar
continue, I
las
want to
palabras de
invite you
apertura y bienvenida a este
I
encuentro
want to
a
invite
Tricia
Tricia
Wynn,
Wind to give
quien
us
es
some
la
welcoming
líder del
words to
programa de
kickstart this
intercambio de
event. Who is
conocimiento e
the leader
innovación
of
de la
the
Alianza
Program of
Mundial
Knowledge
para
and
la
Innovation
Educación
Exchange for the
GPI-KICS.
World Alliance for
El
Education,
programa es
GPE
gestionado
KICS?
e
The
implementado por el
program is
Centro
managed and
Internacional de
implemented by
Investigaciones
the
para el Desarrollo de
IDRC
Canadá,
from Canada,
donde Tricia
where
supervisa
Tricia
su estrategia
oversees
general
her
y
general
ejecución en
strategy
estrecha
and
colaboración con la
execution,
Secretaría del
closely
GPI y que
collaborating
hoy
with the
nos
Secretary of the
acompaña desde
GPE,
Ottawa,
and
Canadá.
joins us today
Adelante,
from
Tricia, por favor.
Ottawa, Canada. Go ahead, Tricia, please. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you for including me in this very interesting event. Warm hellos to the more than 100 people who are online right now for this event. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today to discuss this topic that's of growing importance, education system resilience. Around the world, education systems are increasingly disrupted by disasters, conflicts, the severe effects of climate change, pandemics, and conflict, but also from disruptors that have a very positive potential but are still disruptive, things like artificial intelligence. When it comes to the Latin American and Caribbean region, even just last July, Guatemala City experienced earthquakes, which caused authorities to close schools to prevent safety of students, teachers, and school staff. In the Caribbean, schools often get closed because of severe weather, so we know that these issues of disruptions are very real to us. And resilience is often proposed as a solution to these challenges. In the education sector, especially in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, many talked about building back better by strengthening education system resilience and recognizing that education systems globally, not just in LAC, but globally, are not really well prepared to deal with shocks and disruptions. And however, despite the prominence of the wording and the calls for resilience, there's actually very little consensus about what education system resilience actually means, both in theory and in practice. So many countries have implemented measures that contribute to resilience, but the conceptual and practical ambiguity presents obstacles for policymakers and practitioners who are trying to provide meaningful resilience building initiatives. So this is where the focus of the GPE-KICS Observatory on Education Resilience Initiative comes in. The Adapted project, which you're going to hear more about today, is a key part of this initiative. And it's one part of the applied research effort of the Global Partnership for Education, Knowledge and Innovation Exchange, GPE-KICS, that Paulina just mentioned in her introduction. This is a joint endeavor between GPE and the International Development Research Center. And the Observatory Initiative examines the meanings and practices of education system resilience in GPE partner countries across the globe. By examining national perspectives and practices, the initiative is going to unpack the concept of resilience and then generate evidence-based recommendations for crisis preparedness and building stronger and more resilient systems. Now, of course, countries are already tackling aspects of resilience with policies about integrating disaster risk reduction into education, crisis-sensitive planning, climate change considerations. However, when we're looking at system resilience, some are cautioning us that a primarily technical framing might overlook other really important aspects, whether they be cultural, relational, maybe even spiritual dimensions that shape how communities experience and sustain resilience. Through the observatory, we aim to unpack these layers to better understand what resilience means in diverse educational contexts and how it can be implemented in ways that are inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. And we all acknowledge that when it comes to resilience and disruptions, it's often the most vulnerable that are the most negatively impacted. So we always want to maintain that focus on inclusive and equity within what we're working on. So today's discussion is grounded in the very first of multiple outputs from the Adapted project. We're starting with looking at what education system documents tell us about how countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are thinking about resilience. And the project will build on that and today's discussion in their future research, including future potential disruptions and how to build resilience. In addition to this project that focuses on countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, the overall observatory spans Africa, Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the Pacific, so covering a total of 90 GPE partner countries. And there are 5 other projects like this one. These projects are also producing studies that will be coming available in the coming months, so we'll be able to compare and learn from a wide range of experiences while remaining really grounded in local realities. Before I pass over the mic, I would like to take a moment to congratulate GRADE, the lead implementing partner for the Observatory Initiative in Latin America and the Caribbean, on the release of this first report and the organization of this event. And we want to extend our sincere thanks to SUMA and UNICEF for their collaboration with GRADE as consortia partners. Their joint efforts have already been instrumental and will continue to be helpful in advancing the goals of the observatory and deepening our understanding of education system resilience. So with that, Paulina, I think I'll pass it back to you.
Muchas gracias, Trisha, por tus palabras. Les recuerdo a todas y todos que está habilitada la opción de traducción simultánea en el botón Interpretación, abajo en sus pantallas, y pueden modificar el canal para escuchar tanto en español, inglés y francés. A continuación, le damos la bienvenida a Dante Castillo, director en Políticas y Prácticas Innovadoras de SUMA y miembro del Observatorio Adapted. Por favor.
Muchísimas gracias, Paulina, muchísimas gracias y un saludo a todos los colegas que se están sumando desde la región, y no solo a América Latina, sino que también a colegas de otras regiones que están participando de este seminario, de este webinar. Para nosotros en Suma es un honor poder estar compartiendo este proyecto con la institución líder de Adapted, del observatorio, que es GRADE, y también poder estar trabajando con UNICEF y nuestro trabajo también en colaboración con IDRC, con el IDRC, IDRC de Canadá. Em, Hemos pensado desde Suma y el trabajo que hacemos en la región que este observatorio nos va a permitir poder entender las dinámicas que desarrollan los sistemas educativos en términos de prepararse y fortalecer capacidades de resiliencia. Y eso tiene que ver con las habilidades que empiezan a desarrollar los sistemas educativos a nivel nacional, precisamente para lidiar con estas situaciones de emergencia que precisamente nombraba Trisha: desastres naturales, ¿sí? Crisis de salud, zonas de conflicto, que de alguna manera son amenazas que precisamente ponen en riesgo y en jaque el derecho a la educación y la continuidad educativa, particularmente de aquellas poblaciones más desaventajadas y de los grupos de la población de alguna manera que se encuentran en mayor precariedad y con dificultades de acceder a oportunidades educativas de calidad. Entonces, para nosotros, para Suma, es una alegría poder estar trabajando precisamente con GRADE, con UNICEF, en el desarrollo de este observatorio. Vamos a estar viendo durante este tiempo de desarrollo del proyecto, a partir de precisamente de este primer documento que ha sido elaborado, precisamente cuáles son esas claves que de alguna manera los países, los significados, que de alguna manera los países empiezan a asignar a la necesidad de avanzar hacia sistemas educativos más resilientes. Y eso empieza a tocar algunas hebras que son, algunos ejes que son claves, ¿sí? Por ejemplo, formas de trabajo intersectorial, ¿sí? Ya hemos empezado a ver que la necesidad de articular procesos y dinámicas de trabajo intersectorial al interior del Estado, entre los ministerios de educación y entre otras dependencias estatales y otras agencias estatales. Asimismo, muchas claves que tienen que ver con cómo pensamos a estas poblaciones más vulnerables desde una perspectiva más interseccional, digamos. Poblaciones que de alguna manera viven en zonas rurales, que mayoritariamente con poblaciones indígenas, ¿sí? Y como muchos de precisamente estos escenarios de riesgo les afectan especialmente. Entonces, nada, creemos que haciendo eco de las palabras precisamente de Trisha, como Suma, vamos a estar en este esfuerzo de poder generar conocimiento, no solo a nivel teórico, sino también a nivel práctico, que permita ofrecer recomendaciones a los países de Centroamérica y el Caribe, particularmente aquellos de la Alianza Mundial para la Educación, precisamente en términos de cómo avanzar hacia sistemas educativos más resilientes y por lo tanto hacia sistemas con capacidades estatales que permitan precisamente sortear, diría yo, de mejor manera estos escenarios futuros de disrupción. Muchas gracias, Paulina.
Muchas gracias, Dante, por tus palabras. Les quiero contar que nos están viendo de distintas partes del
We are
mundo.
being watched from many parts of the world. We have people from Ukraine, Vietnam, Venezuela, Chile, Argentina, Mexico, and one more that we will be greeting one by one. And we also want to tell you that this project began by the end of 2024, and this is the first year that it's been working. And such is the case that we published our first report that is called How Do We Understand Educational Resilience in the Countries of Latin America and the Caribbean? And you can download this report in English, Spanish, and French in our website, www.adaptive-lac.org. We're going to put the link in the chat soon. The report is part of the objectives of the Observatory Adapted, which is led by Santiago Cueto, who is also a graduate in educational psychology and a PhD in educational psychology by the University of Indiana in the United States. He's also a main researcher for GRADE, who today will also introduce the results of the report. But before we give the floor to Santiago, we remind you once more that you can leave your questions in the Q&A section for Zoom, where we will also share the link to download the report and a couple of questions to interact with you. Remember that after the conversation panel, there will be a space to answer these questions. That said, please go ahead, Santiago.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me to be here seeing people from many regions in the world, and I would like to give a warm welcome to my colleagues from the other observatories, the regional observatories that Trisha mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. This is a fascinating project. I am pleased to coordinate from GRADI, which is a research center in Lima, along with the SUMA colleagues who have a great activity with GPEKICS, this initiative in different countries from Central America, the Caribbean, Bolivia, that is led by Raúl Chacón, who is here with us. If you may want to look for more information about this, we've been working with SUMA and also with UNICEF, with Agustín de la Varga, the coordinator of education in Latin America. So I'm going to share with you the report so you can see it, that can be downloaded from the website. And what I wanted to tell you is that this is not the last version of it. We have sent, as we usually do, we have sent this document to different readers who have given us their comments. I wanted to mention in particular the Planning Institute for the Education from UNESCO in the Buenos Aires office that sent us these dozens of comments about the report, but we're going to wait for this session to end and also for your comments and from the panelists as well. And I think we're going to share that within some more minutes to give a final version to this report. And I can also tell you what comes next after this. This report is originated from a very interesting question that was considered by Sergi about how the educational resilience is understood in the GPE countries. We are trying to tackle this. This is a complicated or complex question. And our goal is to gather, produce, and disseminate evidence that strengthens the response capacity of primary and secondary education system in LAC, with a focus on GPE countries in the face of current inequities, emerging scenarios, and future disruptions. So here we have very interesting things that I'm going to try to cover one by one throughout the report. First, the notion of response. It's when we about the resilience, what we are seeing in the reports. It's not only responding, but anticipating. A resilient system is one that anticipates the shocks, the disruptions, and is ready in the best way possible so the educational services and the educational quality is not interrupted. And second, I would like to highlight this part about inequities, because there is consensus about this. If a country is affected by a shock, there will be some groups in the population that will feel in a stronger way that shock, that will be highly affected. These are vulnerable groups. And I'm going to talk about this again later. These are the countries that are part of the observatory, part of the GPEKICS. It's always good to mention them again. So we have this report. How is educational resilience understood in Latin America and in its countries? I wanted to check first, or wanted to show you a historical summary. Resilience, the word comes from the 17th century, when they started to witness that there were some metals, some materials that when suffered a shock, they would recover their shape, their initial shape. In the 20th century, I'm moving to the second point, Garmes and other authors started to work from a psychological perspective on this concept, because they realized that some families that had suffered a mental disease of one of their members They were less affected than others, so they were more resilient. In the last decades, this concept has been widespread, and it has a very important tradition in the psychological field, but it also has an impact in the educational field. They study if that is an intrinsic trait of students and teachers, because among teachers, there is this analysis on this topic. They talk about the burnout in teachers. Some others use the word quemado in Spanish, that is burned, but he doesn't like that translation. But it's related to the stress accumulation, to the tiredness that teachers suffer from. When I go to point number 4, there are some other authors that discovered that these educational practices would also promote the resilience. But then I go to number 5 because you can see that what I have just told you until point 3, it was mainly related to the traits of individuals. So it is an individual that is resilient. But then it was clear that it's not only the individual, but we see in different contexts, and those contexts may facilitate or not facilitate the resilience, the resistance from people. So it's not only about the individuals, but it is about the context where these individuals are. And the last one, number 6, it's about the resilient educational systems. It's about structures, processes, and people, and this is the focus of this process. These resilient educational systems. How is it that educational systems may avoid, respond, and then rebuild themselves from certain disruptions or from certain shocks if it was necessary to rebuild? So I'm going to show you this in English as well. So we see different institutions that are related to this. We have a couple from the United Nations. We have the IIPE, the UNDRR. But if maybe you can see this from GADRES and from USAID. And this is a section that I would like this to be interactive. I would like to ask you to check 3 reports. If you're looking for a global report, I may suggest 3. USAID reported last year a report. IDRC published a scoping study where they see, or where we see the definition of the term. And the last one, you can see it here, King and Suriyama. They published this in Asia, in the Development Bank from Asia in 2025 about the resilience at a national level. And I'm asking Aranza to copy these references in the chat if someone may want to read this. I suppose there are more, but I think these ones are quite interesting and global and will help you to understand that. So how do we define this concept? This is the capacity of systems to respond, adapt, and recover from changes and threats by strengthening and interconnecting structures. Let's say, for example, at different government levels, processes, and people, while giving special attention to the most vulnerable groups. Out of this definition and checking this report, I have some things to add as well. It's not only to respond, but also there is the need to anticipate, to adapt before things happen. Let's say, for example, in the Central American countries and Latin American countries, we know that hurricanes are a devastating phenomena, but we know when the season will be, so we could anticipate to that. So many countries that's what they are doing. So damages are less to the educational system. And then this word, to recover. And when we have talked, we've had a lot of interviews. We have talked to some of those who are here with us, listening to us, sharing with us. Maybe they can help us later and they can. And when you talk about recovering, it's not that you want to be the way you were before, but you want to rebuild, and that reconstruction is better. If we ever have a shock, build back better. It's to do it better than before. So we have these definitions, we have these different concepts that are part of this definition. So when we have this comparative report, I'm going to show you the results in a couple of minutes in some more slides. So how do we tackle this topic? We had a lot of interviews, a lot of officers from UNICEF Education Department. They helped us to have these interviews with people from the GPE, from UNESCO. And we said, we're going to check how this appears, if it ever appears, if that term appears in 3 documents that we consider are key for any educational system. First is the education laws. We see the years in which we analyze this. There are some laws that have been there for a long time and they haven't been renewed. The curricula, that is a study framework, which is what students should learn, what teachers should work on. And finally, the education strategic plans that are more specific than laws, because they mention what it is expected to achieve in 5 years, in 10 years. But the strategic plans, and we look for the most recent ones. I should say that we didn't find all the documents for all the countries. If you want to see this in detail, you can check the report. If you have a document that we didn't consider, please let us know that we are happy to receive what you got, that you may suggest. So what is it that we found? So this term resilience, it doesn't appear that much, or there is a limited presence of it. It appears in the strategic plans in 6 of the 11 countries. We saw this term related to climate, to institutions, and I should say that for the educational resilience, something that is quite interesting for us in this analysis, the resilience is not only related to the educational sector, but it has to interact with other sectors from the state. So we have this horizontal coordination. They have to interact with other state levels. So there is this certain coordination at the ministry level, at the level of decentralized offices, at the level of schools, teachers, students, and their families. That is like a triangle of the interaction. And finally, we see a connection that exceeds the groups that I've just mentioned to include in different cases the private sector, civil society, and different international networks that I mentioned before. And there's plenty of movement around this topic or about this topic of resilience, understood in the terms that I've mentioned, that is not always called resilience. and that it leads us to think that these may have very interesting fruits or very interesting results. So we found this in the curricula, but only in one country. But we didn't find this in the laws, in the educational laws. And you may say, yes, you're right, maybe we won't see the resilience term, but we will see other terms, similar terms. So when looking at the reports that I mentioned before, the one of the USAID, the one of IDRC that was in the framework of the GPE KICS, we saw related terms such as strengthen, anticipate, recover, prevent, response capacity, adaptive capacity, and coping capacity. So we said, okay, let's look for these terms as well, not only resilience, but related terms. And then we found that by far, out of these terms that I mentioned here, these are like 8 terms. Out of those 8, the one that has the higher numbers of mention, that is to strengthening. Resilience is understood as a strengthening. Strengthening what? So I'll show you that later. So it appears with 458 mentions in the strategic plans. 11 countries have it. In the curricula as well, 5 countries mention that, and in the laws, 5 countries mention that. But again, strengthening what? So here we have these 5 about the results, about what is it that we should strengthen. First, strengthening vulnerable populations. And by vulnerable populations, we understand people, and also in the reports, not only this is proven in this empirical studies. So we have population living in extreme poverty in rural areas, indigenous people, and also there is always this gender dimension that is transversal to the previous ones. In terms of infrastructure, this is mainly related to the hurricanes that I mentioned before, but also floodings, earthquakes, among others, among other natural phenomena. Also strengthening teacher training, the management and the governance to give more agility and adaptability and safety, and then strengthening the curriculum design so students develop competencies, or the skills. So strengthening is the mostly used term related to resilience. In terms of challenges and hazards, what we saw, we looked for this information in the documents. The most common ones are disasters. If someone wants to see this, we call them natural disasters. And we wrote naturals in quote or in quotations, but the more specialists we asked, they would say that natural disasters does not work very well because in many cases either would never have been produced without the human action, or the human action would have made them worse. But this is not our creation, but this is from different agencies. They use disasters that it comes from a natural component, hurricanes, climate change that is on base of most of and also migration phenomena. So this term disaster is found in all countries in at least one of the revised documents, and there is this interrelationship. So we have that in the different topics, they are related among themselves. So a disaster can be related to migration, So they are not in silos. They are not totally apart from each other, but these phenomena may have a complex dynamic to understand.
Vulnerable populations are the ones that I think I've mentioned them previously. Oh, I forgot about disabilities. That's where my lapsus is. This is what I glossed over. That's a very important matter. So we can reaffirm the right to education for everybody, including people with disabilities. That a few decades ago was considered that some types of disabilities made children unable to go through formal education, and that's a myth that has been debunked consistently over time, and we have more and more people with disabilities in formal education. But what's interesting is to ask, how is it that disruptions can affect people with disabilities differently? And the intersectional term that we use, that a lot of you see in literature all over, has a lot to do with, in large part, of gender studies, but more widely used to say what happens with a person that is not only indigenous, they live in a rural area, they're a woman, and they have a disability. We're talking about people that have many features and characteristics, and there's a notion of intersectionality there. We found a little relationship between vulnerable populations and terms related to resilience. This is something that we need to highlight. And to wrap things up, because I'm running out of time, this has to do with structures, processes, and people. And I circle back to the point that I made at the beginning, that resilience is not just individuals, but it does include them. This notion of horizontal and vertical connections and between different sectors. There's relevance in the strengthening the development of capabilities, the necessity to coordinate across sectors and joint work among local authorities, schools, and communities. Here we'll surely think and develop in the next reports a more wide-reaching component when it comes to cooperation and resilience at the school, individual, family, teachers, and director level. Identifying future risks and challenges is key to enhancing the system's scope and capacity. We were talking with many people, and when we did the interviews, like conversation sounds a little bit informal. It was actually a structured interview. They're recorded. When we asked the people in Central America and the Caribbean, what scenarios that are disrupted do you think will happen in the future? They will surely say something related to climate change, natural disasters, and more specifically, more hurricanes, flooding, droughts, and similar things. The second to last term is one that usually is not put on the literature, but that comes up clearly from all the conversations that we have. When you say, okay, the school is interrupted, what's going to happen? Well, the kids are not going to go to class, they will learn less. But a lot of the people that we talk to, they say that it's not just that. We also need to worry about the well-being, their mental health, the students' mental health, because it could be that one of these natural phenomena, again, putting quotation marks on natural, some of these disasters may lead to the loss of material goods of a family, or maybe even worse, someone could be maimed, harmed, their health could be adversely affected, or even their death. All of this affects mental health. So when we think about education, it seems that we need to start thinking more and more, not only on the fundamental skills of math, for example, we also need to worry about their mental health. The study has a lot of limitations. I remember a song from many years ago that said words, words, and words. Basically, we've analyzed words here. We haven't really analyzed how much of this actually happens. This is something that we'll do in the following reports that are going to have themed focuses. The next one is going to be focused on these disasters that we talked about. And I think I am done here, and I'll give the floor back to you, Paulina. These are the questions for our kind commenters. Thank you so much, Santiago, for your presentation. If you'd like, you can stop sharing your screen. There we go. Thank you so much, Santiago, for your presentation of the findings from this report. This has given us food for thought. As we already asked the next question to the audience. To your judgment, do you think your educational system is resilient? 61 people that are watching us right now replied. 48% said yes, and 52% said no. It's interesting, and I think we can still reflect on it on the conversation panel. So moving on and going deeper on the challenges on how to strengthen educational systems to safeguard the rights and continuity in education for more vulnerable students in particular, we invite the panelists that join us today to turn on their cameras so we can begin this conversation space along with Santiago, and we can comment together on this report. This panel will be moderated by Santiago Cueto, leader of Adapted, and we'll have Romina Kasman and Germain, who are specialists in education. Romina and Germain, we invite you to turn on your cameras just like Santiago. Romina Kasman is a graduate of political science in the University of El Salvador in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and she has a master's in international education from the George Washington University in the United States and a master's in education, economy, and entrepreneurship from the University of Delaware, also in the United States. She's currently in charge of the educational sector of the Regional Office of UNESCO in San Jose for Central America, Colombia, and Mexico, with a representation for Colombia, Costa Rica, Honduras, and also for El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Panama. Previously, she was a program coordinator for the Regional Program of Education of the Regional Office for Latin America and the Caribbean, the ORIALC from UNESCO, where she also contributed to coordinating the implementation of educational initiatives for world citizenship. Germain Anthony is a specialist who's experienced in policies and educational development with a long history in the coordination of initiatives in the states of the Eastern Caribbean. As a technical specialist in the unit for management, educational development of the OECS Commission. He's also led very relevant and important programs in educational reforms and digital transformation, and he has worked on the implementation of ecosystems for learning in the digital environment from regional systems for educational management. Welcome everybody for this webinar. Welcome to this webinar. Before we begin again, we remind you that you can leave your questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom. Go ahead, please, Santiago, Romina, and Germain. Okay, well, thank you so much again, Romina and Germain. The work that Romina does from UNESCO in Costa Rica and Germain from the Eastern Caribbean states, it's very interesting for us. And that's why we decided to invite them to comment and talk about it. So here are the two questions that we've coordinated for the conversation panel. From your experience, in what way do the findings of the report correspond with what is happening in practice in the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean regarding educational resilience? And in light of the identified challenges and threats in the report, what should education systems in the region prioritize to confront them and strengthen their preparedness for the future, particularly regarding vulnerable populations? So the first question is more about how much does it resonate with what you guys are currently doing. You can say a lot, not at all, that a little. We hope something, but to extend the notion, and we'd love to hear what kind of work you guys do in your offices. And the second question has a lot to do with what this report. So I don't know which one of you would like to begin. Maybe we go on alphabetical order. We let Jermaine speak first.
Well, thank you, Santiago, and thank you all for allowing me to speak, especially coming from a small chain of small islands where we not often on the global stage. But this issue of resilience is something that speaks very much to our daily lives in the Oasis region. And also, Santiago, thank you guys for doing such a very good job on this report. It's very rich, and there's a lot in there to ponder. I just want to start off by maybe establishing, and maybe for those of us, rest of us in Latin America who are not aware, the population and the sizes of these islands are quite small. We're talking about small countries with populations of 180,000 at most, some of as few as 40,000, and Montserrat presently has a population of under 10,000 people. I think we'll also see there are some differences in terms of what matters more in terms of resilience for some of the larger Latin American countries compared to the Caribbean. Straight off the bat, one of the major issues we have are climate issues. And so I saw in the report there was quite a lot captured in there. And so I can say for sure there's a lot of alignment in terms of what is said in the report. Just picking as an example of that, Dominica, the report highlights is very much treating resilience as a system priority. It's not just a catchphrase. So there's a lot happening in terms of their 2023-2030 plan as it tries to tie resilience to human well-being, infrastructure, hardening, climate resilience, tech use, data systems, all of that. That is important. I need not talk more about COVID-19. We all went through it and certainly reminded us of some of the systemic changes that need to be made. Dominica was one of those countries that faced a Category 5 hurricane with winds up to 165 miles an hour or 266 kilometers per hour. So you can imagine the amount of devastation that can unleash on a small island. And so the report does capture how a country like Dominica comes out of that kind of experience and understanding the need that for change that has to take place. It is pretty much a similar pattern in the rest of the region. So, for example, St. Lucia speaks to the importance of climate resilient schools. The Oasis Commission itself had commissioned a report on the design for resilient schools. And oddly enough, it was COVID-19 that sort of derailed the implementation of the recommendations that were in there. And I would like to take this opportunity to inform you that, in fact, we have now a very small project, micro project, with the New Zealand High Commission to sort of implement training and equipment delivery and installation at 2 indigenous communities in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and Dominica, respectively. And the aim there really is to boost preparedness for any climate disaster or emergency. And so further along in terms of what's happening in the region, the report also, I noted, did also mention Grenada's attempting to achieve resilience through pedagogy, improved pedagogy and digital transformation. So a lot of alignment as far as we're seeing. I do want to note that perhaps the report could speak to a little bit more about other threats such as that of cybersecurity, and that of data sovereignty. I think Tricia did hint on that a little bit. And these are becoming increasingly critical for the OECS, especially as we're building several digital platforms to support and promote education, and even to we begin to do a lot of work in terms of implementing education management information systems. It's important for us to own those systems and to be able to manage and maintain them. And so we see that in and outside like the cybersecurity, data sovereignty issues as particular factors that will affect our resilience. It's important for us to protect sensitive learner data. It's also important for us to ensure that there's regional or national control over the storage use of student data. We need to be able to ensure for parents that there's a level of trust and continuity in the systems. And of course, for the OECS, resilience must therefore include robust cybersecurity and data sovereignty measures. So with that said, I think I'll hand it over back to you, Santiago. Let me know if there's anything you would like me to further clarify or point out.
No, that's very good. Thank you very much, Charmaine. And yeah, it's very good that you put a human dimension on the issues, the problems that you have described, such as the hurricane in Dominica. And you mentioned very nicely the plan that they have put together, and it's an example, I think, for other countries. So thank you very much. Y perdón, en castellano.
Okay,
Ahora
and now
pasamos
back to Spanish.
a Romina. Te
We move
escuchamos.
on to Romina. We hear you, Romina. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Santiago. ¿Me
Thank you so
escuchan
much, Santiago. Can you guys hear me okay?
Sí, muy bien.
bien? Muy bien. Bueno, muchas gracias.
All right,
Solo les
perfect.
pido disculpas porque
Thank you
quizás
so
hay
much, and I
ruido de
apologize
fondo.
because maybe there's a lot of
Muchas
background
veces
noise. I am
tratando
at a cafe here in Honduras, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of what I am doing that has to do with this that we're talking about. First, I want to thank you all for the invitation. I also want to congratulate you for this report. It's a fantastic report, and it's helpful for us because lets us understand how this contributes and how it reflects in our work, and how, in my opinion, I think it's useful. And so it happens that many times we don't build concepts, or we don't focus on how practice and the evolution of the discussion can produce knowledge and experiences that can translate into new knowledge. And when I say new knowledge, it's of course a review of the literature, but also do critical thinking on that which we are reading, what exists, and also look at it under the light of reality. There's not a lot of appreciation over the conceptual construction. What do I mean by this? What are we talking about? They are concepts that are used a lot, that there's a common consensus, but we don't deepen into their meanings. So to me, as part of an international organism, and for the work that I do with different actors, with civil society, with educational institutions, and with governments, with other cooperators, this is very helpful to maybe, I don't know if putting us all on the same page, but it will motivate us to rethink concepts. And I think that is very important. I also wanted to mention that despite the transformations that have been done in education, and we see this in all the different countries, and the advancements that have been done, we've accelerated, and after the pandemic, there have been political and policy processes for reformation that show there's a larger emphasis in that right to education. I'm not saying just in education, in the right to education, in its continuity, in the inclusion, in the quality, of course. But despite these transformations, I think the right to education is still under threat. And I think that when I read this report, I think it sheds light on the way to rethink the right to education. And I think that that is fundamental. How can we rethink the right to education? That's part of our work, of our discussion, of our advocacy. What happens when education, the right, is under threat, when it's interrupted? When we have all these matters, this climate matters, these planetary matters, conflicts, risks, threats, things that, and here I'm going to move on to the next subject.
son solo coyunturas, son estructuras. El derecho a la educación hoy está amenazado
The right to
estructuralmente.
education is threatenedly, it's structurally threatened. It's a matter of a structure.
Creo que eso también hay que empezar a pensarlo porque
So we have to start thinking, because we cannot think about the same as in the right to education in terms of access, permanence, quality, inclusion, equity, and what do we do with the policies? How do we rethink the right to education so that it is kept? Because it sets up the variables and all the categories are under question. I would like also to mention that in the work that we do, many times when we discuss about the right to education and the resilience concepts and other related concepts, they don't make a difference in terms of the territory. It's not the same in the rural areas, in the urban areas, in the semi-rural areas, in the semi-urban areas. It's not the same. So here I'm in Honduras. I'm in Intiuca, and we're working with 28 educational centers, public educational centers, agroforestry, technical schools from 15 to 17 years, rural students, indigenous people, and we are going beyond. We are not only think about emergency things and safety things, but also there are regulations, there are concepts, but they think about the resilience. For example, in these educational centers is related to safekeeping the identity and the food safety. When we think about resilience and when we think about the human things, we have to think about health, about well-being, but also we have to think about this. Sometimes we maintain these important concepts to define the contexts, but there are structural situations such as poverty, extreme poverty, exclusion, so that concept of resilience, so that's why I'm saying that rethinking education, and that's the work that we do. I think about the education, I think about the framework of the Agenda 2030, that is the intersectional focus and the interdependency among rights. So to finalize, until last year, we were working with 40 educational faculties, with ministries of education. We had this seminar workshop to redefine the competencies that teachers should have for emergency situations, risk situations, threat situations, and that's to be resilient. We have a lot of findings. We would love to share this, but for example, we think that these socio-emotional things are important to consider, but also we have the resilience from the individual, the health and the well-being, and an emphasis in technology. And the question is how new technologies, new ITCs, also the AI contributes not only to the educational continuity, that you continue learning, but a construction and experience, an educational collective experience, because education is a collective experience, and especially in these environments, how do we build this without bricks? and we have a large amount of publications on this, and how technologies help us to reinforce the sense of community and the strengthening of social relationships. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Romina, for your reflection. You have reminded me about your discussion about the right to education, that United Nations, the UNESCO, defend this focus. I wonder why we want education. And many people would respond that to increase the productivity of the country or to elevate the performance in the standardized tests. But if we see education as something based on a right, and we think about all the students, including some groups that are not so numerous or that are more difficult or more expensive to educate. For example, if I have a certain amount of money, and considering what you're saying, we have this real story of a person from the Ministry of Education in the country. If I have this amount of money, and with this amount of money, I can provide internet to 50,000 students in the cities, but I can also give internet or have access to internet to 5,000 people in rural areas. Which one do I prefer, 50,000 or 5,000? And the officers might say much is better or more is better, and we see that gaps are generated, important gaps are generated based on this kind of judgment. So I love the connection that you did with other topics. This of this food safety, it's something that has come in our reports, in our conversations, in the literature revisions. So when we talk about this internet and the connection to digital devices, that is fundamental when there are no in-person classes, we have the opportunity, and also we have the threat, because that can be an opportunity for everyone, but if we just let the market to make the decisions, maybe the gaps are going to be bigger, because we will hear stories such as the ones that I've just said, the people who are poor, the extreme poor people with less access to internet. So the role of the teachers is also mentioned in our conversations, and we will also talk about that in the next reports. I see a lot of comments here in the chat that are very helpful. I don't know if we will be able to answer to all of them, but we are recording the session, and I promise that we are going to take them into account. Okay, so Paulina, please let us know how this continues. Okay, thank you so much to the three of you. Our public has participated a lot. I hear people from Panama, Congo Republic, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, and many more. Thank you, all of you who are here with us in our webinar organized by the Adapted Observatory. Now I'm going to read some of the comments and questions for Romina, Germaine, and so you can and Santiago, so you can share your advice, your answers. One of the comments is, I cannot understand the similarities between resilience and strengthening. Consider how this was defined at the beginning, how you want to define it. So I feel that my educational system has no resilience. If there is a strengthening, I don't know what to strengthen in the field where I am working. I am very concerned about this. I think that is more related to me. Where does this comment come from? Or this come from? The strengthening word or concept is related to resilience in the USAID report that I've just mentioned, and I've just given you the reference in the chat in case you want to read it. So if we were going to be very strict, we would have only used the term resilience that doesn't have a very clear synonym, but there is this search of a synonym or a similar word. We clearly see that there are some countries that have thought and planned better their resilience strategies than other countries, and they have a connection between offices, state offices, coordination with the public sector, private sector. They participate with international organizations. We see a lot of examples. We mentioned one before, that is the one of Dominica. So I think it's going to be harder for governments, but I think it's going to be harder to say, okay, there was this hurricane that is here, and they might say, oh, what is it that we're going to do? But when you know there's going to be a hurricane, but there are some other things that cannot be anticipated, such as earthquakes. And we know the earthquakes are going to hit us as well. So how is our educational system prepared for that? We have another question here from Edwin, and he says that I think that in Latin America we should have an epistemic twist of its pedagogic knowledge and the ancestral knowledge that should be recognized in the curricula. Have you seen these doubts in your research and in your experience? This is for Jermaine and Romina, and about their experience in the report. About the ancestral knowledge, it's an interesting consideration. I do not remember we have found it with specificity, but let me check that again. And I can let Jermaine or Romina to answer. In their works, when you talk with population, do they also remind you about these ancestral practices and knowledge that should be kept and make them official?
Yes, thanks for that question. It's a very good question, as a matter of fact. And no, I didn't pick it up as such in the report, Santiago. Yes, this is a concern that educators have, parents have, that as we digitize, as we globalize a lot of what's happening with education, some people are a bit concerned that young learners are losing the cultural identity. They're losing the heritage. And in fact, some are even afraid that we're losing the authentic and tactile traditional means of learning, reading from a book, making contact with the soil, going outside, having a field trip. All of those things seem to be, at least there's a fear that this is being pushed aside. But more broadly, in terms of preserving our culture, there have been some steps made. I can speak to, so for instance, the use of the Creole language in Saint Lucia, the Creole language in Dominica, which is a French Creole, by the way. This has been more or less formalized and accepted. Even in the French Antilles, you would think they have made the use of that so-called local language official and accepted for use in the schools. And that's very important, because that is what the children come to the school with. That's the language spoken in the home. And of course, the big advantage of that is the teachers are able to meet them where they are at in terms of their literacy. Beyond that as well, it's important for us to maintain many of our cultural values and norms if we are going to survive as a people and not just be, consumed by global forces. Just this morning, I was watching a clip where it is alleged, I'm not sure, but it's alleged the big tech, the Zucks and the Elons and the, what are the other names now? All the big tech folks, they are making sure that their children are attending Montessori's and very, traditional tech schools. and the rest of the world, we seem to be pushing everyone towards, high tech in the classroom. So that is a challenge, but I think there's a balance we can strike because access is very, very important. Technology is, at the end of the day, a leveler in terms of opportunities. So we have to figure out how to do that, but at the same time, not to lose who we are. So back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Romina, en tu trabajo en América Central.
Romina, in your work in Central America, there are different indigenous populations. These things about the ancestral knowledge, is there something relevant that we consider? Of course. Yes, what I was saying about the experience that we are supporting here in these rural and agroforestry schools in 8 departments of Honduras, and most of the students are from indigenous populations. And in these days, we're doing these adaptation plans, resilience adaptations, risks, disasters, crises, conflicts. For example, different of these schools that are in the biosphere reserves in protected areas. So we have to see that even if you could we have a lot of protocols that are different work. There is work from different actors from the government, but the local adaptation is related to the acknowledgement of cultures, traditions, histories, concepts of, and also the context of exclusion, and how people develops their skills for life, for work, for sustainable development. And we see here included this thing about this food safety and health matters, because with the ancestral and cosmovision matters or practices, they prevent diseases. These schools have large extensions for crops that are mainly related to ancestral food with sustainable lifestyle. So when we talk about green concepts, education for climate change, these schools are already doing this because they have that in their world vision. So when you develop this concept of resilience and you work with different communities, the notion of territory is very important. That's why I talk about rethinking about the right to education, not because we want to fragment that. That's what is unique, what is the core. I think there are specific resilience. So how do we promote this? How do we get adapted to that? We may strengthen, we have the question and the difference between strengthening and resilience. I would say the resilience is the new citizenship. Resilience should be part of a global and local citizenship. When we talk about sustainable development, interculturality, climate change, this has to be related to resilience, because this is not only the preparation for an event, but also for the structure. Let's think about populations that are refugees, displaced people that have these forced displacements. So where does this resilience start? How are they adapted to the new things? It's not only about labor insertion. It's not only about the resilience, but about the host communities. How do we create that habit of resilience? So we think a lot about the fundamental skills, and we're left behind, and we all know that. But we have to think about how do we build resilience, not only in terms of policies, but I would say this is something mandatory for the curriculum, in the teachers' training, in the pedagogic practices, and I encourage all of you to do this. Yes, there are no universal recipes like context proven. So we have to consider the local actors and everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your answers from the public, from the panelists that were here with us. And before we end our meeting, I want to remind you about the next steps of the Adapted Observatory. As Santiago mentioned, this is the first report of the observatory. Santiago, if you may give us more clarity about what is coming for all those attendees of the webinar. So in our conversations, one question, a common question is, what are the large topics on resilience? What are the large topics on educational disruption? One is disasters related to climate change, and this is a report that is where people have talked about this. If someone has inputs, resources, we are looking for that in the literature, in the studies, in the organizations where we can work. The second one is related to disruption because of health matters.
The pandemic 2019-2020, they had a huge effect, but it's not an isolated event. At a smaller scale, we can have other disruptions linked to health crisis. The third one has to do with migration, that it affects in larger or smaller capacity, it affects the countries of the GPE. But there's also, it's a very important matter. The fourth one is violence at a different level. It could be different violence in the schools, but it can also be violence, we're going to call it organized through gangs or criminal organizations that can also affect education and the possibilities of people receiving education. There's multiple stories of people, to link this with another topic I mentioned, that leave school because of violence issues and then they migrate. This is linked to these 5 topics I am talking about. And the last one are political and economical crisis. In our conversations, we've discovered that, for example, elections for representatives can lead to disruptions, interruptions for people's studies when results are being questioned, or economic crisis can lead to food insecurity matters, like Romina mentioned. That can also lead to disruptions of the educational system as a whole. These topics, we're going to be working on them. I wanted to show you something. You can see here, maybe we can put it in the chat, the website where you can find all of this information, but there's also the contact email. We're going to gather all of your comments and questions, and we're going to incorporate them in the following report. Here is the email. Please, we want to hear from you. We want to coordinate with all of you. Thank you, Paulina. Thank you, Santiago, and everybody who has joined us here today. And remember, you can visit, just like Santiago said, our website, which is www.adapted-lac.org. I just put this in the chat so you can visit us and also subscribe to our newsletter, to our database, so we can send you all the information on resilience in the region. And thank you again to all of you who have asked questions. We're going to share the report and Santiago's presentation. Additionally, the summary of this seminar to everybody that's subscribed, and you can subscribe to our database whenever you want. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and special thanks to our English, Spanish, and French interpreters who joined us for the day. Thank you, everybody, and please have a great day.